Dana Dornsife is a designer turned philanthropist whose activities help people the world over. When tragedy struck close to home, she started the Lazarex Foundation, which she founded in order to connect people with clinical trials and help the economically disadvantaged to be able to capitalize on trials that they might not otherwise have access. In the development of the foundation, she realized the large racial gap that exists in clinical trials. So we discussed that and how her foundation is trying to close that gap. We also discuss her inspiration for starting the foundation and the federal regulations she had to overcome in order to help the economically disadvantaged. In addition to Lazarex, she supports World Vision, an international humanitarian agency through which she supports microeconomic enterprise, agriculture, and literacy programs in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, and in partnership with the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, well water drilling in Mali, Ghana, Niger, Ethiopia, Zambia, and Malawi. She is also a supporter of the Alzheimer's Association Cerebrospinal Fluid Quality Control Program, launched in 2009, that brought together world laboratories with the aim of standardizing the measurement potential of Alzheimer biomarkers in CSF. She also serves on the board of directors of Epius Biotechnologies, a biopharmaceutical company developing genetic medicine for the treatment of cancer, and she is also actively involved in the USC Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences.
Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring, a practical guide for practicing physicians. Dr. Bradley Block interviews experts in and out of medicine to find out everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. The ideas expressed on this podcast are those of the interviewer and interviewee and do not represent those of their respective employers. And now, here's Dr. Bradley Block.
Dana Dornsife, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, Brad, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
So can you share with us the origin story of Lazarex? I've heard you tell it a few times, and it must be hard to tell, but I think it's really important for our physician audience to hear.
Sure. So my youngest sister's husband, Mike, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003. And of course, you all know what the outcomes are for most pancreatic cancer patients. And so, we collectively felt that if we did the same thing everyone else did, we would not get different results. And so while Mike went on to standard of care chemotherapy, they tasked me with trying to find a clinical trial, which is fine, except that I have zero medical background. I was actually a designer by trade. So literally started from scratch, went to clinicaltrials.gov, navigated through that system, for weeks. And at the end of, 5 weeks, I had a list of 3 or 4 clinical trials that I thought sounded reasonable. And, for me as a layperson, I had to, I'd read 2 sentences of a protocol and look up 10 words in medicaldictionary.com and go, it was a very, very tedious process. And once we identified those trials, then I had to contact the sponsors and see, how we could get Mike enrolled, et cetera. And it was just very perplexing to me. And I just thought to myself, how do most people do this, right? I don't have cancer. I wasn't taking care of someone with cancer. My youngest son had just gone off to college. I just sold my business. So I was like in the perfect position to be able to do that work. And it still took me 5 weeks to get it done. So that was my first aha moment, was just the challenge for cancer patients and their caregivers to identify the clinical trial opportunities. We did get Mike enrolled in a trial, and fortunately he responded well. And just the nature of the, how cancer patients are treated, one pancreatic patient talks to another pancreatic patient, they share what they're doing, et cetera. And they started to ask him, hey, Mike, what are you doing? I want to do what you're doing. And he would say to them, just call my sister-in-law, Dana. She'll help you. And that is literally how Lazarex Cancer Foundation started. And then would talk to these other patients Of course, I shared with them the information that I had. And then when the conversation turned to logistics, they would say, "Oh, I can't do that." And I'm saying, what do you mean you can't do that? You have to do that. I can't afford it. And after the third or fourth patient that I spoke to, I realized that the only reason Mike was able to take advantage of medical breakthroughs in technology was because he had a family who could write a check and support him through the process of covering, all of those out-of-pocket costs to get him where he needed to be when he needed to be there. So that really left an impression on me. I just felt, and I just said, to myself, oh, someday somebody ought to do something about this. And I didn't really think that would ever be me. But we lost Mike 19 months later. So we had a good extra period of time with good quality of life with his family, and just felt a moral and fundamental obligation to do something. And so in 2006, I formed a 501c3, started Lazarex Cancer Foundation, and never looked back. And that's 6,000 patients ago.
Let's talk about this chronologically. The 501c?
501c3.
501c3. Okay. So how did you go from, essentially matchmaking, right? You're trying to matchmake patients with trials to formalizing it. Like what are the nuts and bolts of that? Let's say one of our listeners has an idea, right? I want to start a foundation, right?
Yeah.
Where do you begin with something like that?
Well, honestly, I didn't. This all happened very organically, right? But I found that I had very good intentions and a desire to help these other patients who were just really going through the terrible time that I knew they were going through, because we went through it personally, right? But I got to a point where sharing information wasn't enough. To tell a patient, oh, well, there's this clinical trial or there's that clinical trial, and for them not to be able to get to it, was really bothersome to me. So I realized that in order for me to address that problem, I had to have a vehicle that allowed me to raise money so that we could reimburse those travel expenses. And that vehicle was the 501c3. So we got a lawyer to start the 501c3 for us, and that allowed me to approach potential donors. And you start out and you're looking at your circle of friends and your business associates and your family, right? And you tap all of them on the shoulder, and then you just kind of keep growing that effort. And so really that's how it all began. I never sat down and said, I'm going to write a business plan and I'm going to have a nonprofit and this is what I want to do. No, this was all a response to a terrible, terrible situation and feeling like I really could do something positive around it.
And it's turned into an incredible legacy for your brother-in-law.
It has. And, this year, 2020, even with COVID and all of the clinical research programs shutting down, and enrollment of new patients and starting new trials, we will end this year having assisted over 1,000 patients.
Wow.
And when I look back, when we started, year one, I think, had 3 patients. Year 2 was 9. Year 3 was 14. The first year we did 25 patients. We were jumping for joy, and here we are, 1,000 patients. But this is the thing: there are tens of thousands more who need our help, right? And so we can't get tired. We just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other and growing this Lazarex Cancer Foundation for the benefit of all who need us.
It sounds like there are really 2 types of services that you provide, right? There's the matchmaking, finding the clinical trials. But then there's the second, there's the financial assistance for the clinical trials. Is that correct? It's like almost two completely different arms.
That's
of the
exactly
foundation.
right. So the first thing that we do, what the way I explain it is that we're all about removing barriers for patients so that we can create a platform of equitable access to cancer clinical trials. So the first barrier is knowledge, right? If patients don't know about a clinical trial, they won't go, or they're not going to be able to even think about, do I or don't I want to participate? So that's why the navigation piece is so important. Then you have, financial toxicity. Cancer is expensive. It devastates so many people financially. And for those individuals to consider participating in a cancer clinical trial where they're constantly reaching into their pocket, where there's pretty much nothing left to try and participate in a clinical trial, it doesn't happen. Patients, they start making decisions based on their financial situation instead of what's best for them. So we want to remove that from the decision-making equation and just allow them to focus on what's best for them. Support network. Unfortunately, 54% of the time, I believe it is, a cancer clinical trial is not in your backyard, and it requires that you travel extensively, right? So that means either long trips in the car right now during COVID, airline, lodging, even just traveling, a tank of gas and tolls and parking. I mean, parking out here in San Francisco is $40 a day, right? These patients cannot afford that on a routine basis. So that's why we provide that reimbursement, so we can address their financial concerns. We also cover the cost of a travel companion, because many times patients who are participating in a clinical trial have a compromised performance status, and they're not able to drive, or they're not able to travel on their own, right? They need someone with them to administer care, but they also don't want to be alone at that time, at that stage in their disease, right? And they need to bring part of their support network with them. So that's why we about 2 years after I started Lazarex, I realized we needed to include a travel companion for these patients. Then we have a whole nother level of barriers that we address: cultural barriers, language barriers, historic, the fear, the mistrust that our medical abuses have caused, and finally, socioeconomic status. To address all of those barriers requires that we provide navigation assistance, but also assistance with reimbursing travel expenses. And we also do a lot of community outreach and engagement amongst minority communities to try and bring them into the fold of not just cancer clinical trials, but to improve cancer health outcomes across the continuum of cancer care.
So this is one of my favorite parts about your organization is that, you recognize the huge racial disparities that exist right now in clinical trials. And actually, I think there's a COVID, I don't know if it's a vaccine trial or a treatment medication trial, but they had to extend their enrollment period because after they'd finished what they thought would be the appropriate enrollment period, they realized that a lot of minorities were extraordinarily underrepresented. So they had to continue the enrollment period. So this is a huge problem in medicine. So what did you learn about the racial disparities that exist right now in clinical trials?
So I've really learned a lot about racial disparities in clinical trials over the years. And, to be honest with you, Brad, when the medical institutions that we work with, or where we send patients to clinical trials, they asked about 6 or 7 years ago, hey, we really appreciate you supporting patients in clinical trials. Can you help us improve our diversity in clinical trials? And at first I thought, no, that's how am I going to be able to do that, right? But it really was a nagging question. And I I really thought long and hard about it. And I said, okay, well, I need to get smarter. So I started reading articles and I started talking to principal investigators and academicians and to a lot of drug sponsors. And I realized this really is a serious problem, right? So on the enrollment side, 5% of cancer patients who are eligible to participate in trials actually do. Of those, a very small percentage come from our minority communities combined, right? I think it's 5 or 6%. So small. And it is not a statistically relevant enough number to be able to understand the scientific efficacy of a novel therapeutic for the various segments of our population. So why does that exist? And that's where I just learned so much. So first of all, a big part of it, especially for the African American community, is lack of trust, fear, and just not understanding the whole clinical trial process because of the medical abuses that have occurred. So that's one thing that we have to address. And that we are addressing, right? Language. If English is not your first language, it's very, very difficult to hear a physician talk in English, understand what they're trying to say. I mean, when you go through the clinical trial consent process, even if English is your first language, it's really challenging, right? So just add to that a language barrier, okay?
I would argue that it's challenging for an otolaryngologist who is involved in an oncology clinical trial to understand everything. So even from specialties, even if you're a trained physician, a trained scientist, if it's somewhere out of your area of expertise, this stuff is just remarkably complicated. It is complicated. It's so hard to wrap your head around.
It is remarkably complicated. If you are an individual who has a low socioeconomic standing, right? And sadly, poverty disproportionately affects our communities of color. So the majority of people who are, poor are people of color. A cancer diagnosis for an individual in that situation, they're already doing everything they can do just to survive the day. Now you throw a cancer diagnosis on top of it, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? They don't know what to do. They don't have the resources to be able to deal with it. It's easy for people to say, well, you need to eat better. You need to eat a healthier diet. You need to exercise. Well, many people who are in that situation they live in food deserts. They don't have access to healthy food. They don't feel safe going outside and trying to exercise, and they don't necessarily have Fitness 19 on the corner that they can go to and work out at a gym. You've got a lot of single moms who are working multiple jobs just to put food on their table for their children. It's across the board a struggle. And the thing that has been most recently my biggest bugaboo is this whole issue around payer mix and government assisted insurance plans, because many times those plans, if you have government assisted medical insurance, you are relegated to go to a specific clinic for your health care. So first of all, it's really hard to get an appointment. Secondly, if you do get an appointment and you do have cancer, their pharmacy formularies and what they're allowed to prescribe, it's all negotiated. So they're getting whatever the cheap stuff is, not the good stuff. And then sometimes the cheap stuff is the good stuff, but most of the time it isn't, right? So they are only given what the pharmacy formulary has to give. And guess how many of those locations actually have cancer clinical trials? A big fat zero for the most part. Very, very few and far between. So even if you have the luxury of insurance, and even if you have a job that allows you to take paid leave to go to a doctor's appointment, right? You're still not going to get access to the latest and greatest. So this is a very complex problem, but it's not unresolvable. I really feel that we can do better. We can do much, much better. But it's going to be a bottom-up approach. It can't be top-down. It can't be mandated. We have to embrace these communities. We have to have culturally appropriate programs. We have to have boots on the ground in a consistent and community-led way. And once we do that and we get their ear, we can start to make these small, incremental changes with them and hopefully improve cancer health outcomes and ultimately health disparities.
How is it that you are able to get into the communities and gain? Because I see one of my partners is fond of saying, the answer is money. Now tell me the question, right? Like, so in terms of funding, like you can, if you raise enough money, you can subsidize people to be able to travel and fine. But to gain the trust of the community, that doesn't seem like something that's solved financially. So how is it that, these communities that have historically good foundation for distrust of the medical community, how do we regain their trust? How have you been doing it?
Well, I am a graduate of Drexel University in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia has some of the worst cancer health outcomes of any top 10 most populated city in the country. They also have a very poor African-American population in West Philadelphia, which is the area where we're now working in. And Drexel is a very civic-minded university, and their president made a commitment to the surrounding community that the resources that the university has to offer are the resources of the community. And he's really stuck to that. And as a result of that, over the past 5 or 6 years, we've had a program that we developed in the 10 of the poorest neighborhoods, African-American neighborhoods in West Philadelphia. But we've developed it with people who are African-American, who come from those neighborhoods, who understand the history of those neighborhoods. A couple of the folks that we're working with on the team from Drexel, they do have a medical background, and they are involved in a lot of the social well-being aspects of, what to do out in a community like this. So we wanted to start a community center that would help reach individuals and provide resources that they needed to better themselves so that, it was simple things like helping them write resumes, teaching them how to use computers. Many of them, they don't have internet access. They can't afford to pay for the internet. They don't even have computers. They don't know how to work computers. You can't apply for a job if you don't know how to use a computer. Legal issues, expungement. There's all kinds of issues that these community members have to deal with. And we asked them, what do you need? What would we're going to give you this to make your life better. We went to them and said, what do you need to make your life better? And it was amazing what they came back to us with. And ever so slowly, we've been able to develop these community programs with them, with their ideas, with their voice, and with people who look like them. And, it took a good 5 years, but we were able to chip away at that lack of trust. And now these 10 neighborhoods really view that community center as their community center. So when I wanted to engage those communities around cancer health outcomes, it was easy for me to go back to the community and say, hey, let's take this to a deeper level? And can we talk about cancer? And can we talk about your beliefs, your fears, your issues around cancer? And they said yes. I mean, it was like on the top of their list of health issues that they wanted to deal with. And so it's just really important that a program like that, it has to be place-based. You have to go where the people are. You cannot expect them to come to you. It has to be community-led, right? They have to feel that they're in the driver's seat around what's happening in their community. And it has to be culturally appropriate. It has to be administered by individuals that they feel comfortable with. So it was based on those principles that we built this program, and we're really excited about what we're putting together there in West Philadelphia. The community members are really excited about having a voice in their health future. And once we resolve this little thing called COVID, we're looking forward to actually being able to implement these programs and ideas that we've collectively put together.
When you started the community center, the intention all along was for this to become a conduit for the foundation? Or this was kind of, because I know you have a lot of humanitarian missions, right?
Yeah.
The Lazarex Foundation is not your only humanitarian, is not your only philanthropy. So was this a different arm of your philanthropy that you then incorporated, or the intention was all along was for this to be part of Lazarex?
It was a different arm of our philanthropy that we wanted to provide an opportunity for these communities to have access to the resources they needed to build a better life for themselves, right? To and do it in a sustainable way, right? To give them the tools that they needed to be able to have a better life. And so a lot of the activities that we do at the center, that's what the focus is on. And it just so happened that when we started that, 6 years ago, I was concurrently working at Lazarex Cancer Foundation and trying to come up with a sustainable approach to removing these barriers. And 3 or 4 years later, those two projects came together. And I said, oh my gosh, this is it is such a difficult issue, right? This health disparities, especially in cancer, is so difficult to deal with. However, we have a community of people that we've worked with for years now who trust us and who know we only have their best interests at heart, and we deliver. We walk our talk. We do what we say we're going to do, right? And so that's when the light bulb went on, and I thought, my gosh, I can go back to these communities and ask, can we have a deeper conversation around health outcomes in cancer? And they said, absolutely. I mean, we live in fear. I mean, for many of these community members, they look at cancer diagnosis as death. That's it. So I was thrilled at the level of response that we got. And the team that I have there through the university, they're amazing. And I think they interviewed 440 community members to get their input around brochures, messaging, videos. Like, we're trying to really build this program, this community impact program, into something that we can replicate and take it from Philadelphia to Los Angeles or Miami or Chicago, or right, and try and lay the groundwork there. Now, we're not always going to have a bricks and mortar opportunity like we do in West Philadelphia, but that has been just a tremendous demonstration project, to show that it really can be done. And out of that was born this concept that we have called the Cancer Wellness Hub. And we're looking at that now into developing that as kind of like a pop-up so that we can engage with community advocacy organizations, churches, et cetera, and, just have like a cancer wellness pop-up concept where we can serve the community, but we don't have the overhead of bricks and mortar, because that's not a sustainable plan. It's too expensive.
Yeah, if there's a brick and mortar community center, it doesn't need to be your brick and mortar community center, because the one that's already there, and then, utilizing those community leaders to help get your information about your foundation out.
Exactly. And then you have to partner with academic institutions, the medical institutions. They're all looking for training and internship opportunities. And so being able to, or schools of social work, they're all looking for opportunities to engage with the community. And so, I'm kind of sharing with you the latest and greatest at Lazarex Cancer Foundation. So stay tuned, and we'll revisit this a year from now and see how we did. But I think it has a lot of potential, and it's very timely. We started this long before COVID showed us the true nature of health disparities. So I feel like we have a little bit of a jump on it, but we can't go backwards. We just can't. We cannot let this happen again.
Yeah, you guys, you're really doing incredible work. But the racial disparities, the socioeconomic status, those were not your only barriers. They were actually legal barriers to the foundation, right? Because you can't.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You can't pay someone as we'd be afraid of people getting taken advantage of, right? If they could be paid to be in a clinical trial, they're already having a tough time because of their cancer, they can't work. Sure, I'll take it. And that creates a conflict of interest, right? So there was, the FDA had regulations that ended up being a barrier to you.
Exactly. You would think, and everyone would say to me, well, just go to pharma. They should fund this all day long, right? They need patients in clinical trials. You have patients who need trials. Let's just put them together. So I'd go to pharma and say, hey, will you support our work? And every single time, no, we can't, it's considered coercion or inducement. There's strict guidance around not pay to play, not enticing patients financially to participate in trials. And so I said, okay, well, how did we get here, right? So again, I had to go out and do a lot of research and figure out, how did we create this problem where you've got 10,000 cancer clinical trials enrolling patients, and you've got tens of thousands of patients who need cancer clinical trials to survive, and yet they never come together, right? Why did that happen? So it all stems around these barriers that we're talking about, and primarily knowledge and financial barriers, right? So the FDA, because of the historical medical abuses that have taken place, that have really impacted minority communities, the FDA had guidance language that said you cannot induce or coerce a patient to participate with financial gain, right? And so I started taking it, and I went to pharma and I said, look, if I can get the FDA, if we can fix that coercion and inducement issue, can we have a different conversation? And the answer was tentative. Yes, we can, right? So we went to the FDA. I got, oh my gosh, I can't even tell you how much time I spent on the Hill talking to congressmen from both sides of the aisle. We put communications together with the FDA. And really what I wanted, Brad, is I wanted them to carve out reimbursement separate of financially paying someone to participate in a trial, because those are two different things, right? Reimbursement creates parity. It enables an individual who cannot afford the out-of-pocket expenses to be able to participate in a trial. You're not financially enriching them. You're simply paying them back. And so, fortunately, the FDA responded very rapidly to that. And 8 months later, I had that guidance language. And that really laid the groundwork for us to be able to launch our current program, our institutional level program called Impact, where we're undertaking specific activities at the institutional level to show with scientific rigor. It itself is actually a clinical trial. It's interventional, a non-therapeutic clinical trial, to show that by undertaking specific activities, we can positively influence enrollment and retention in clinical trials and improve diversity. From January 1 of 2018 through August 31 of this year, we had 334 participants in our impact study. It's at 2 sites, UCSF, San Francisco, and USC Norris in Los Angeles. 63% of those participants who participated in that program are minorities. 63%.
Wow.
Remember, the national average is
5. Yeah.
right?
Wow.
Okay. 52% come from households earning $25,000 or less. I mean, these are individuals who could never consider participating in a trial without that reimbursement program. So our whole goal is to get rid of this as a problem, have pharma recognize, okay, if we include reimbursement as part of our protocol budgets, then we can get rid of this problem. And if we have our principal investigators who are conducting clinical trials, introducing patients, letting them know that they can be reimbursed for the out-of-pocket expenses when they're going through that very, cumbersome clinical trial consent process, then we see that we can, in fact, improve enrollment and have a serious impact on diversity in trials.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you changed it such that now pharmaceutical companies can reimburse people, or is this just for the impact study and they're going to see how it works out? Or this is now a change in the industry?
It is a change in the industry.
Wow.
It's a wholesale change in the industry. And we're also doing work at the state level as well, because IRBs get a little, they're also concerned about the whole coercion and inducement issue.
Yeah.
So, but that FDA language, that really was a game changer for us. And I have to say, the pharmaceutical industry gets a lot of bad knocks, right? But we have had so many pharma companies, step up and say, we want to support this work. This work is important. And especially now, they're very, very focused on improving diversity and health disparities. And so I'm really very hopeful that we'll start to see some changes here.
So what's next? What's next for Lazarex?
Oh my gosh. So we've proven that we can, through the impact program, increase enrollment and diversity in trials at comprehensive cancer centers. Now what we need to do is we need to undertake those same activities at the community level, because that's where the vast majority of patients are being seen. And so it's really important, if we're going to have a sustainable approach and we're going to really bring the majority of patients into the fold of clinical trials, that we meet them where they are, right? So again, it's place-based. So we need to, our next layer of work is going to be, taking those same principles, going out into the community environment and just seeing if we can't recreate the success that we've had with impact. And the second thing that I am really, really excited about is deploying the whole concept of the Cancer Wellness Hub as part of that. I'm very excited about that opportunity. I think we're going to see huge change there.
So if we have an oncologist listening and they have a patient that they think might qualify, where do they find you and where do we find out more about the Lazarex Foundation?
Yeah, so Lazarex, our website is www.lazarex.org, and I'm going to spell it. It's LAZAREX.org. And all they have to do is go to our website, contact us either through email or inquiry, or just give us a call. We have a whole patient services team standing ready to assist. And we exist to be a resource for cancer patients and for oncologists who, if someone's failed standard of care or second line or third line treatment, and you're not associated with a research institution, you're probably not going to be able to offer a clinical trial as an alternative, but we can, right? So it's a way of extending hope and extending opportunity for those patients that they're not able to help any longer.
And speeding up the research process, because you're shortening by increasing the enrollment, you're shortening the enrollment period, you're allowing these trials to go on faster, and they come to their conclusions faster, and then it's on to the next iteration, right? So the advances are able to happen faster with faster enrollment.
And along those lines, it's amazing. 48% of clinical trials never complete. 11% never enroll a single patient. 37% do not finish on time or at all, not because the therapeutic didn't work, but because they didn't enroll enough patients. So we may have lost the opportunity for so many, treatments, right, that could have worked that we'll never know because we were not able to enroll enough patients. And so, so if we can improve enrollment, we can get through these trials faster. And let's face it, it's just as important to know if your drug has therapeutic benefit as it is to know if it doesn't. So if it's a drug that's not going to work, you want to know that as fast as you can so you can cut and move to the next, right, opportunity. Yeah, so increasing enrollment and especially increasing diversity. Those are two things that we really need to focus on. Incredible.
Well, Dana Dornsife, Lazarex.org, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for all the incredible work you're doing.
Oh, Brad, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and just to shed some light on this issue.
That was Dr. Bradley Block at the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. He can be found at physiciansguidetodoctoring.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a question for a previous guest or have an idea for a future episode, send a comment on the webpage. Also, please be sure to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. We'll see you next time on the Physician's Guide to Doctoring.